Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to Getulio Vargas Foundation. My name is Jorge Oliveira. I'm a journalist and master of ceremony. I will have the pleasure to conduct the work of this day. We are continuing the international seminar on energy transition in the sea, challenges and opportunities for Brazil. It's a relevant opportunity where 53 institutions represented by 63 experts from different areas of public performance, private and scientific and environmental. They are debating how to equalize challenges and potentializing opportunities. As it can see in the screen, we have the institutions that is the crew of this sailing. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the re-edition of the Sagres School, where complex matrices comprised by variables that interconnect to each other indicates the navigations that can take us to a success and to execute strategy plans as the country corresponds to the unique historical moments that we are experiencing. To form the opening table of this day, I kindly ask to come up to the stage the president of Getúlio Vargas Foundation, Professor Carlos Ivan Simonsen Leal, Deputy Secretary of Energy and Economy of the Sea of the Government of the State of Rio, Mr. Felipe Peixoto, the Secretary of Waterways of the Ministry of Ports and Airports, Mr. Gino Antunes, who is joining us online. He also has our round of applause. The Director of Productive Development, Innovation and Foreign Trades of BNDES, Mr. José Luis Gordon. And the Director of the Economics School of Getúlio Vargas Foundation in São Paulo, Luisa Furquim de Andrade. You can take your seats. With the floor, Professor Carlos Ivan Simonsen Leal. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here representing Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and I wanted to start telling a little story that it applies to the topic that we are going to discuss today, and to many other subjects in general in Brazil. When I started my teenage years, I read in a history book at school that Brazil had made a huge mistake. What was the mistake? That the country had adopted an, an option of transportation focused on roadways, trucks, and cars, and not in the intensive use of railways. For many years, I believed in what was written in my history book. Later, I started learning a few things. At first, there was a road that was designed that today it's called the North-South Railway. And I found out that it was designed by my great great grandfather in 1870 something. My great grandfather, Raimundo Belfor Roxo, and André Rebouças designed this road that crossed the country. And until nowadays, it is not complete. It is a railway. So both of them were part of of a group as Visconde Rio Branco had sent to study engineering in France, and they brought the most advanced technology at the time for the railways. But this railway was not built because of a simple reason. There was no money to build it. And until nowadays, it is not concluded because it crosses Brazil from north to south, as the name suggests, for the same reason. Just as a curiosity, the track of 1870 something is pretty much the same as it is today. There are some topographic survey of all that. So you can imagine chose if you have chosen the railways instead of roadways and trucks and cars, and that are efficient, but it allowed us to build our economy after the 50s. So the first remark that I make is this: cash flow matters. Cash flow is king, and we cannot think about energy transition without thinking about our real possibilities. What I can say is that I'm going to make a nuclear fusion. There is no nuclear fusion in the world, but if there is a nuclear fusion, forget everything that we are talking about because it will be better than anything that we can propose nowadays. But what happens is that not even the Americans or Europeans can advance so fast in this business, and the investments are very heavy. So the number one issue is there is the ideal without restriction and the ideal with restrictions. Our biggest restriction, and I'm not talking about a technological advance, is our biggest restriction is that the cash flow can be sustainable. And I do a little bit, I start making money with that, and I do it more, and I started making more, and I create a virtual cycle. All of those who are here and a little bit older might remember that in the 70s, there were two oil crises that caught Brazil by surprise. The first one, we could accommodate increasing the external debt of the country. The second one, we went through a 20-year period of recessions and low growth, partially because we didn't have the conditions to continue investing as we needed to invest. It's very important to understand that energy transition is conditioned in the short run by the capacity to invest, and it conditions the capacity to invest in the middle term for the results that it has in the investment that was made. So you need to have a strategy to do this thing, and this strategy has to be sustainable. And even if BNDES, with all the cash flow, does not have the money to support a business this side, it has to be hyper focused. And we have a huge challenge because the world doesn't know how to do a well-made energy transition. This is the truth. The Europeans want to push this down the throat of everyone with electric cars with the European way. So suddenly you start to discover that electric energy to charge the car was generated by a coal plant. So these cars are not avoiding pollution. Secondly, the automobile takes a long time to charge and does not uh, drive so much as a classic car. So this is a problem because the demand after some time starts to understand the potential buyers start to understand that this is not so interesting. As much as the person wants to help the ecology, he also wants to drive 550 kilometers with one tank and not 400 kilometers and then stop 4 hours to charge the battery and then the other 150. There is, it's not so easy to have lithium batteries because with the existing technology and so on. So what we have is that maybe the process of investment that was defined by the Europeans to Europe, if for them it's going to be optimal, to us it will be disastrous. I'm not going to analyze the different types of motorization of automobiles or the different types of existing technologies to bring potential energy transitions. What I want to say is that there are many possible models, and you are in the situation that you have to move past this, but you don't know exactly what this is. This is the challenge. So we have a problem of sustainability, of an uncertain choice, and it's critical to be extremely prudent. In this regard, Brazil has a great advantage, but it needs to know how to demonstrate in order to explore that is the current energy matrix that is much cleaner than the energy matrix of other regions and other countries. We are not used to two things. Here in Brazil, we like to think that we have Mars, that we are in Mars, and that would be our desire, that we don't need to interact with the rest of the world. We need to interact and we need to learn how to fight for our ideas, to fight pacifically, of course, peacefully, to fight for our models and our peculiarities. They cannot tell us that we cannot have alcohol driven ships or agricultural fossil fuels just because someone in Europe doesn't like the idea that we have plantations to produce this fuel. We need to know how to demonstrate that with the increase of productivity that we had in the agriculture, we are not reducing agricultural areas. We are not reducing agricultural production. It's quite the opposite. We are helping the world to be peaceful, because in this world, if there is no food, you can have wars. So Brazil performs an important role, and we are not damaging the environment necessarily. We can demonstrate that. Here at Getúlio Vargas Foundation, there are studies about this. We are not polluting. It is possible to make the agriculture with the zero carbon balance, and so on. But there are other things that are more modern. I saw a presentation in other seminar at BNDES, and we heard about many techniques of chemical engineering and general engineering that shows that there are many different possibilities However, there is a one caveat here. There are possibilities still in the lab and in the plates not necessarily up and running and not being used in its efficiency and its use and the efficient use of resources and so on. So this is an extremely interesting moment, and the seminar here at the foundation is focused on the energy transition at the sea. Brazil is a country that has very interesting characteristics. It is a country with 8,000 kilometers of coastline, and traditionally, it's a country that looks at inside. 95% of our trade is done at the sea with the foreign trade and not by land. And with the rest of Latin America is made by sea, that it's cheaper. But even with that, we tend to think only a little about what the sea can offer us. We have a long tradition in our navy, in our foreign trade. We have more than 180 years of that, but we still think that it is a Brazilian characteristic to think looking at the inside. We are an empire focused on the inside, and this is how our thought is constructed. And we have to think about the energy transition to understand that it's not only a problem of energy supply, it's not only making our economy more efficient, it's also a problem of interaction with the rest of the world. More and more, the game that wants to block our international trade, and this is going to be fierce because the tendency in the long run, if everything is as the world is today, is that Brazil will start to have more and more trade surplus and surplus in current transactions, starting a new phase that we will have surplus in current transactions. Because among other things, the change for the innovation center to Asia, the increase of innovation in Asia, the geopolitical fragmentation of the world will change the prices related to innovation and commodities. Commodities tend to be more expensive related to the innovations. This is perceived. It's not totally rationalized outside of restricted environments, but it is perceived already that we will have a lot of fights ahead of us because that means that the real Brazil's GDP by the PPP is $4.3 trillion, by the exchange rate $2.2 trillion. And that means that if the GDP, if the exchange rate was for the corresponding to the PPP, that would mean that it's much more difficult to buy something here than before. So that means that today we still have problems inherited from the past with the past characteristics by many different factors that were created right after the Second World War, but we are still undervalued. So as we get better valued, more expensive, so to speak, we will change our position in the world.
And if one goes up, another one comes down. So we have to have this central point for the reaction, which will be the energy consumption in Brazil and its exportation. And this is going to happen, I would say, economically violent. These are non tax barriers. These are investment barriers, technology transfer, excuse me. So, summing up everything I just said, energy transition in this sector is fundamental, but not only in order to have more energy available or produce more energy for the simple fact of doing things in a cleaner way, but also because these are our first steps towards economic reiteration with the rest of the world. So I would like to thank you all for being here and give back the floor to our presenter. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Professor Carlos Ivan Simonson. And we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Célia Jordan. She's an estate congresswoman. Well, the state of Rio de Janeiro's representative, Felipe Peixoto, good morning to everyone. Carlos Ivan, is such a big pleasure to be here today. I was a student here. Also greet Louise and Lillian, and also Dino, that is here with us but remotely. Rio de Janeiro hosts this event, and we would like to congratulate all of the organization, especially on behalf of my friend Wilkes, for having this idea to promote a debate with such excellent speakers on such an important topic for our country. We've had the opportunity for these past 2 days to be able to discuss the future of maritime transportation, both in the world, in Brazil and in the world. And since I started in this secretary, I talk to my team, and I was able to deepen a little bit on this discussion of the maritime transportation, and we all agreed that the energy transition would be the last thing done in this area. And then I see myself here in this international discussion about it, and I see that we are heading towards this these ideas and very quickly. And this topic has a direct relationship with our secretary and our governor Claudio Castro. Last year, he realized the importance of this subject, and he then started the secretary of the economics of sea, and that debates this really specifically, the energy transition. And my dear friend Célia Jordan, we were colleagues, and I remember we had a session to talk about the naval industry, and we then started regulating many policies and the creation of CDMAR. And what took the governor to create this secretary to be able to handle these subjects, and invited Hugo Leal, that is a very political person that wanted to have this discussion of such an important topic, both here in Rio and in Brasilia, for the regulation that treats sea economy and energy transition. And this year, specifically, we're having intense discussions on these topics. And I'd like to tell you this, everyone knows, but it's always good to remember that Rio de Janeiro is responsible for 85% of the oil produced here in Brazil and 72% of natural gas. We are the largest biomethane producers of Brazil, the second largest producer of biogas, and we in the past we were very important in sugarcane plantations, but Rio de Janeiro does not want to live on the past and on the present. We are prepared. We're getting ready for the energy transition, and here you will have the opportunity to appreciate our energy transition coordinator, Luis Gustavo, the state plan for energy transition that was able to count on the participation of many important institutions, including FGV, of a plan that will provide guidelines for our energy transition. And I would like to tell you this, is that we're not only going to stay on these numbers that we are currently in. So I'm pretty sure that you know about everything that is being done about hydrogen in the Porto Açu port. We are getting ready. With all due respect of Rio Grande do Norte, Rio Grande do Sul, that have many possibilities and a lot of wind for the production of clean wind energy, but we do have that potential as well. We were once again blessed by God, and then we have oil, gas, and wind, and we will start producing offshore wind energy. And Rio de Janeiro has over 40 years of experience in the offshore and naval technology. And we have here half of the ships of Brazil, where we have mapped all the contributions to Petrobras that can contribute to the energy production, and Rio de Janeiro has half of the ships of Brazil. And for having so many years of experience in naval technology and being able now to implement eolic wind energy, offshore wind energy, and we can provide support and knowledge as well. And with all due respect, I'd also like to talk about this agenda here of the international agenda that many of the times wants to define what's best for our country. And yesterday it was very clear to me that our country is an example of clean energy to the world. What Brazil is today, what Europe will probably be in 20, 30 years. So they look at Brazil and they want to be like us. Right? So we are a country that produces hydroelectric energy. We have a huge onshore wind energy park, solar energy park. We have nuclear energy here in Rio de Janeiro as well, with a huge potential to the construction, finalization of the Angra 3 construction here in Rio de Janeiro. And we have to find our way. And with all due respect to the international economies of the North, Brazil will find its way. Rio de Janeiro has many projects that on these topics, we have vehicles that are bio, excuse me, that are biofueled, and you can be sure that when we're talking about maritime transportation, that will not be different. We have to use all of our experience to the future of fuels. We have to look, analyze to understand what are the pathways to naval transportation. And just to finish my speech, I'd like to talk a little bit of a project that is already being executed that are the sustainable corridors, as blue corridors, they're also known. And it's important to understand that natural gas is very important nowadays and that we have to care for it. Because Rio de Janeiro is an example in the use of natural gas in transportation. Just to give you an idea, we have today in Rio de Janeiro 700 gas stations that provide natural gas to vehicles, and we have around 1.5 million vehicles here in Rio de Janeiro that use natural gas. So we are providing a big participation in clean energy and also cargo transportation. Brazil, it's starting in a very shy way the use of natural gas, and we currently have 1,000 trucks in our roadways that use natural gas, and we have inaugurated last year the sustainable corridors, and these are corridors where that trucks that transport their cargo using natural gas, they might have a place to fill their tanks, to fill with gas, and in the sustainable corridor gas station, they're able to have that supply in 20 minutes max. We already have that in some of the largest high roads in Brazil. BR40, Rio Minas, and Rio Espírito Santo through Setu. And Rio de Janeiro is very ahead in the use of natural gas for cargo transportation. We can also do that for maritime sector. And I'd like to tell you that our whole team is here today paying a lot of attention, and we put ourselves at your disposal for this plan that will be structured and all of the discussions that will be held during the day so that Rio de Janeiro can provide maximum help in this matter. And we are constantly trying to value our technologies, our potential, and what we have, and that we know how to do, and dictating the rules of how we're going to do this, because we already know our pathway. We are heading towards that already, and the seminar will contribute for our work. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have an excellent event. Thank you very much for the words, and we will now hear the Director of Development of Foreign Trade, José Luis Gordon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for the partnership for the construction of this seminar. I'd like to greet Dr. Carlos Ivan and also thank him for this agenda and this space for discussion. To have more light really on this discussion. Also, Professor Felipe Peixoto, the Secretary of Highways and Ports and Airports, Gino Antunes, and also our friend director of the University of São Paulo. And um, I think that we were able to have this debate yesterday at BNDS and today here, an agenda that Brazil can be a pioneer globally, that is the energy transition and sustainability. I think that we are living right now the technical and economical paradigm, which we have the digital economy and climate change. And now we are discussing the whole geopolitical issue of economical development. All of these international disputes that we have seen for the 5G technologies and energy transition. And it's really this paradigm that Brazil has a very important role to lead this energy transition agenda. I think the Brazilian industry has a great potential to be able to transform energy transition with digital economy, and so we can lead the world. And we have seen, and I think I can tell you from the BNDES point of view, the social agenda placed by President Lula, where he has 6 large missions from Brazil: agro industry, the health system, energy transition, transportation, bioeconomy, and digital economy, are really the axes that will help us understand our agenda. So the government has these priorities for the economic development, and the industry sector will be the way to do this. And BNDES is now back again to taking this strategic role. And because in the past administration, we had stopped supporting export agenda, innovation agenda, and sustainability agenda. So now this return of the actions of BNDES and the importance that we have to help all of the energy transition process. We currently, the industrial policies is based on 4 pillars: innovation, green, export, and productivity. And within these 4 pillars, there are many funding options to support this industrial sector to be more innovative and more sustainable. We are making available 200 million reais, 200 billion reais, and we are prioritizing innovative projects. Obviously, if we're comparing with the trillions of dollars in Europe and the United States, it sounds like little, but it is what we can do to improve our industry and to be more competitive and be able to take its technology and job creation, especially in the energy transition at sea. And we were able to see the knowledge and capacity of biofuels to be an important part of this process. I think in Brazil, we have to invest in biofuels and ethanol to be the big players. I think that yesterday's debate made very clear that this is a very varied matrix, but I do believe that ethanol can play this role of being one of the main components of energy transition in the maritime sector. And with the companies, the sea transportation companies, we see that a lot of investment is being done We see many companies that are investing in this ethanol agenda for as a maritime fuel, and I do think that you have to encourage this challenge. We cannot think that electric cars were the winning technology, and from then on, there were no other technologies available. And what we see now is the opposite. In the United States, for example, for each electric vehicle, the government will pay 7,000 reais, and so that's something that happens there. And even with that, people are not buying their own electric cars. The Chinese are selling their electric cars throughout the world. And we do have a very good advanced technology that's hybrid fuel. And Japan is studying having this hybrid agenda, and India, that also builds a lot of biofuels, are also considering this hybrid structure because it's a lot cleaner if we're thinking about all of the chain connected to ethanol.
The governor launched the Move Here is a green mobility program, and it made an announcement of investment of 30 billion to the automotive sector in Brazil that is going to generate jobs and will also transform Brazil into a hub of hybrid cars, which is important besides hygienizing all the chain of the sector and attract investment to Brazil. The sustainable aviation fuel agenda is also an agenda where the ethanol business has a potential and has a capacity to deliver, but we have a competition with the United States that has taken the Brazilian companies to their regions and giving non-reimbursable subsidies so they can produce the SAC there. So they are using the Brazilian competence and taking to the United States. So this is the scenario that we are facing, and this is what we will start facing in the fuels now, because 1% and 2% that is for ethanol that will get most of the Brazilian production of ethanol. Basically, we have to move everything to maritime fuel. So this is a huge potential. And with all the rules that are coming for the SAC agenda, then we have a rule of 1% until 2027, and that will make the biofuels with great potential. So the Brazil's potential is huge in the biofuels agenda and also in the energy transition agenda. If we join everything with the digital economy that has an important role, because we cannot think about the fuel. We have to think about the ports if they are electrified, because this is going to improve their efficiency. We need to have a digital economy. All the energy transition has to be smart. It needs to have connectivity in order to reduce waste and increase productivity. So there is a huge capacity of Brazil to be a global leader, and the industry can be the driver of the next Brazilian growth without leaving the support of the agro has for the country. And this is what the government of President Lula has done to strengthen a industrial policy, a digital industry, a sustainable industry with a development bank that looks at this agenda. Yesterday we were talking to Raízens, and they said that the private banks do not want to run the risk. Although all the speech, they don't want to have the risk of climate change. When there is a project related to climate change, the costs goes up. The development bank, as the BNDES, has the role to enter this agenda. It's worth mentioning that although somebody says that BNDES is something only from Brazil, there are more than development banks in the world that represent 20 trillion in assets, more than $1 trillion a year, and represents 10% of the investment. So BNDES has a strategic role, especially in these agendas where the risk is high, and it's critical to think about the social development in Brazil. And this is the role of the bank that is going to play in the president of Mr. Mercadante. Thank you. Thank you, Director José Luis Gordon. Now I pass the floor to the Director of the Economy School, the School of Economics of FGV, Lilian Furquins de Campos Andrade. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here in our headquarters in Getúlio Vargas Foundation, facing the sea that I agree with the secretary that is beautiful. Of course, the air conditioner is a challenge to me, but we are here present in this day of the second day of this international seminar of energy transition at the sea. I'd like to thank especially Admiral Wilkes that gave me the time to brief about the event and inform us about the development of the activities. It's a shame that I couldn't follow the first day, but I am sure that in this room we can find the most important experts in the ministries and BNDS in order to help us advance in the energy transition agenda. And this is a wonderful topic that involves many different sectors, and this is the hot topic of the moment. I would like to mention that the challenges and opportunities, I believe this was a very accurate title. We are discussing here, as an economists like to organize their thoughts, about the demands and the supply. From the Brazilian perspective, we have a portfolio of supply of renewable energy that is to be envied. It has to be with its location, with its coastline, the amount of solar hours, the different types of biomes. So, from the supply perspective for this portfolio of renewable energies, I understand that our country is in a privileged position. So, it is our role as a country, as a peaceful country, to lead this agenda, especially for the global south. Why am I saying that? Because we are dealing with regulations and decisions that are from the temperate region. Last week I was talking to an expert and he told me that we have to deal with a regulation of the temperate region. And for example, we have to understand what is our green GDP. How do we measure something that is not in the international reports? This is an agenda that Getúlio Vargas Foundation has as a mission and developed the country, and it also takes over. I want to mention a few interesting data here to you. From the demand side, there are some news that makes us proud. Petrobras announced the plan to have two dedicated units to the production of green hydrogen, one in the northeast and another one in the southeast. And this production will choose ethanol. That aroused the interest of many companies that wish to bring, for example, trucks using hydrogen. Another important news is that in March we approved the law of the biofuels. So it is the advance of the ethanol of the second generation that is processed with straw and bagasse. We can have an increase of 50% of the productivity without increasing the planted area. There is still a demand from the demand side. There is a increasing need of clean energy to an area that I want to mention here, that is the major data centers, whose demand for energy is increasing exponentially because of the natural language models. So the artificial intelligence is arriving in a moment that we need to discuss seriously energy transition. Just as a perspective, data centers all over the world, only in 2022, they might have consumed 1 to 2% of the worldwide consumption of energy. If it is 2%, it's basically the consumption of France in 1 year. In Brazil, we have data centers that consume an energy of a city of with 30,000 inhabitants. And obviously, and from the Brazilian point of view, we have an avenue of opportunity, and I understand that this seminar here is only the beginning of this discussion. I also want to mention from the economics school in São Paulo that the Getúlio Vargas Foundation is already working in the plant, that is the energy transition plan that was announced last year with the leadership of the Center of Studies of Climate, with the contribution of many researchers from the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. So that way, foundation plays its role, and I allow myself to remember that this year the foundation turns 80, and it is a young lady because many people ask where she is, and she's turning 80 this year. And it's a huge pleasure for us to be called to that mission to discuss energy transition. And allow me to invite Admiral Wilkes. São Paulo doesn't have the Rio Sea, but we are available to discuss the topic in our facilities, very close to the administration school in São Paulo, our older sister. The economics school is in the new campus, and we are available to discuss this topic and very happy to participate in the discussion of this seminar. Thank you. Thank you, Director Lilian Andrade, for your words. I invite now the Secretary of Waterways and Navigation of the Ministry of Ports and Airports, Dino Antunes, for his address. Hello, good morning. First, let me check if you can listen. We are not listening to you, sir. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, okay, great. First, I want to give everyone a good morning, and I want to thank for the invitation that was made to the Secretary of Waterways and Navigations that for the Ministries of Airports and Ports and Airports, and I really want to thank FGV. FGV, I am considered part of the FGV community because I took a course in São Paulo, including here in the public service here. So I feel myself at home greeting Professor Carlos and Professor Lilian, Secretary Felipe Peixoto, José Luiz from BNDES, and I want to greet Admiral Wilkes. I know that he's in the audience, and I want to greet him because he is restless in his struggle for the economy of the sea. I want to say here, in terms of energy transition, this is one of the topics that appeared very strongly in the last few years. And here in the Ministry of Ports and Airports, since its formation in the beginning of last year, this is something that is part of our agenda. It's a priority here for our minister. In the case of energy transition in the maritime sector, we have two important elements. Professor Carlos already said brilliantly evaluation of the context that we are living. And Secretary Peixoto put this very clearly. But it's important to make this differentiation for the Ministry of Ports and Airports in these two relevant elements. The first, the maritime transportation. The transportation as a consumer of the assets and the economy assets. And of course, it is a huge discussion about decarbonization of the maritime fleets. And here I want to remind you that we have an important transportation that is the inland transportation sector. So it also enters in this discussion. It's very important. And showing what Professor Lilling showed, it is transportation as the consumer side of the energy uh, resources. On the other hand, we have the sea as a provider of energy resources. And in this element, it's very important that the Ministry of Ports and Airports, we are uh, worried of creating proper policies to work with the sea as a provider of energy resources. And remembering that this is a topic that has been masterly discussed by the Brazilian Navy, the concept of Blue Amazon. It's an important concept for the sovereignty of the country, and this has been worked by the Brazilian uh, Navy, by the CIRNE, that is the Interministry Commission of Sea Resources, and working with the maritime mentality. A point that I want to highlight here that happened very recently was the inclusion of the Blue Amazon in our maritime areas in the official maps. So today, the IBGE maps already brings the maritime area recognizing the importance of the Blue Amazon and also bringing to the future generations this vision that the sea is part of our life. Although we have an amazing coast, a gigantic coast, we have to look at the sea. We cannot look at the land for the generation that is also important, but to the agro, to our industries, and so on. We need to look at the sea as an important generation of sources of our economy. In this context, and considering these two streams, about the first stream, that is the waterway transportation, as a consumer of energy resources, we have a few action lines here in the ministry. The ministry works with incentives. We have to create the proper incentives so the private sector can walk in the desired sector, especially in the decarbonization sector with the energy transition. The first element that is worked on this moment is the funding. Professor Carlos said it very well, the necessity of resources. We cannot have the ideal, we have to consider the real with the barriers and all the limitations that this real will bring. And one of the limitations is the funding. The Ministry of Ports and Airports coordinates and it manages the Merchants Navy Fund. It has the 500 billion reais for investments to be putting financing in the private initiative in private sector. BNDES here represented here is one of the operators of the Merchant Navy Fund, and by itself in its environmental agenda it already started making operations using the Merchant Navy Fund with rules and taxes that are more suitable to sustainable vessels or green vessels, as you like to call it. And this is one of the elements that we are discussing here, so we can absorb in the general rules of the merchant fund with the change of the resolution of the National Monetary Council that deals with the general rules of the Merchant Navy Fund, so we can have adequate funds, adequate conditions to the green vessels, the so-called sustainable vessels. We have a few examples of vessels that are moving towards this direction. These are vessels that continued to count on sustainable technologies, and this is the allocation to 10 TSVs. TSVs are the vessels that support the oil rigs, and I want to greet Lillian, who is also in the panel in the table. She's the executive director of ABN. There are 10 PSVs that we call green with hybrid engines and with multi fuels, and already working with the decarbonization in the maritime support. We have cases of tugboats that are preparing. So we will have the tugboats with electric power, and we have the port support team that helps the vessels in their own mooring, in their own port activities. They are the tugboats, and we have to electrify this fleet. And in this direction, we have a clear search, a constant search of the companies or seeking this decarbonization. And the Merchant Navy Fund is one of these instruments that the Ministry of Ports and Airports has to bring these incentives. Another element, in the case of energy consumption, the sea as an energy consumer is about the rules in the navigation as a whole, but especially in the maritime navigation. And we are saying here, especially for cabotage in the country, we have a relevant work with the charters of the the vessels. The charter of vessels indicate in a condensed way what is the political means that we intend for the country. We have the Brazilian flag vessels with some characteristics, foreign flag vessels with different characteristics, some of them cheaper, but they do not provide the security of navigation that we understand that is critical for the cabotage markets. So in this game, in all of these analysis that are made by the markets in terms of chartering, and we understood that the proper incentives would be made inside the regulation of the 146,001, that is the law of the sea, that we make incentives for these vessels understood in the program could be green vessels and sustainable vessels. And that way, we include in the decree that is going to be published rules that bring these incentives so the companies, while making the charter of these vessels, they can do this with green vessels and they can work in towards the decarbonization of our fleet.
And the third element that's also very important, still, in the case of sea economy as energy using, it's infrastructure. We are very much concerned for a while now that has exploded in these past years about onshore supply. And it's necessary for our ports to be ready to provide electricity from a clean matrix. And here we see that Brazil is an example of a clean energy matrix, but we have to prepare our ports to provide electricity for tug sheeps ships, excuse me, that have their vessels parked whenever they are needed, waiting for their need. And here would be very it's interesting if these vessels could be electrified. And ports aren't ready for that. When we have a large vessel, a cargo vessel, these vessels, when they are yarded, they also need a large amount of electricity. When obviously this depends on the type of vessel, one that uses a toll or not. But here we're talking about over 5,000 megawatts at the moment that they are yarded, and make it available so that they won't have to burn diesel. So we have to prepare our ports for this. We also have to prepare our ports for maritime cruises. For example, we know that we will have certainly many cruises supporting the hotel sector of of Belém do Pará, for example, and it would be very interesting for this example to provide them other sources of electricity instead of using diesel. But there are companies that are getting ready to provide natural gas uh, for these vessels. So there are many uses for electricity in our sector, not only for the supply of these vessels with electricity, but also the port activities. Just a reminder that Santos, that's our largest port, it has its own hydroelectric mill that really helps our energy matrix of Santos. So these are just a few elements that work really with rules and incentives so that companies will head on the energy transition and clean energy. And that we also have to define what will be the fuels and the technologies that will be used. If we're going to work with ethanol or hydrogen to ammonia, so that's really not our role to define, but that will come from private initiative, from research institutions, from these incentives that we will provide. But a big concern of ours that has been mentioned already, it's about international rules. Because they work with decarbonization rules that on one side are very good to us because we have a good perspective for decarbonization for our maritime fleet. On the other hand, we have a big concern regarding the rules that they might establish that will bring financial loss to Brazil, because good part of our trading is done by maritime transportation, and when there's an increase in that in those costs, we can have negative impact. So it is a concern to us, and it's something that we are constantly following up with. And just to finish, another element that is also related to the offer, the energy offer, I'd just like to highlight that we're working on policies for this, that especially in the offshore wind power, a very interesting opportunity to work the naval industry that can be fundamental, because wind power, offshore wind power, might be something just like offshore oil in the past, of logistics support and creation of job positions. So it's fundamental for us to use this moment to create this whole these policies for the naval industry to progress. Also, just once again, thank you all for this opportunity. I would like to make myself and our institution at your disposal. Thank you all very much for this relevant event that we are having today on energy transition. Thank you, Secretary Dino Antunes, for your participation. And thanking you all once again. Thanks to our speakers, we will now move on to an important act of this seminar, that is the launching of the Innovation and Energy Transition at Sea Award. I would like to invite to the stage the President of SUBEMA, Mr. Ricardo Portela. So there's a small presentation that I prepared to show you what the Sobema Award is. Good morning to everyone, Mr. President, Admiral. So Sobena has constantly been trying to bring closer the academy and the industry. And last week we had a challenge study on digital transformation. We have the e-naval program, um, and I'd like to thank for the invitation of Admiral Leaves and using this opportunity, this award that we call the Energy Transition Sea of Opportunities. And the idea of this award is that we will have two different awards, actually, one for students and academics and one for industrials. And the idea is that it will be given to work on that impact energy transition and maritime economics. And the themes are free as long as they are related to the energy transition and naval maritime economics, that the industry of oil and gas, offshore hydrodynamics of vessels, alternative fuels, atmospherical emission, anything that is connected to the sea, pretty much. So the submissions were made electronically, are going to be made electronically, excuse me. So we defined this, we have established this template that is already available on our website, where the presentation of each work must be done following these guidelines that are available on the webpage of Sobena. Since this has to be the rules are very clear, we have to understand what is the reaching potential of that topic, the maturity of the topic to understand if there's a pilot test or if it's already ready for application, innovative character, and also social impact. Now, the awarding, it's interesting because it changes constantly. But we will offer the participation of scientific events here in Brazil, and we are going to pay for the subscription costs and hotel and transportation. So for the students, and we were talking this morning about the possible grant for the development of a project for this award. So I think that the industry is starting to notice it better and invest in our award. We will have a publication on Sabina's technical journal. The result of the award will be disclosed during the 30th Congress, International Congress of Waterway Transportation, that will be held in October this year here in Rio de Janeiro. And thank for the CNPq support. It is now ready. You can just access it via this QR code to participate. So good luck. Thank you, Mr. President. We now would like to finish this panel. And right after our official photo, I would like you to ask to return to your seats so we can start with the first panel. Secretary Dino, please just look at the camera so you can be on the picture. Thank you once again. We would now like to have the panel with the topic oil and gas and energy transition. As a moderator of this panel, I would like to invite Dr. Nina Schaefer, Vice President of the Brazilian Companies to Maritime Support. She will present the other participants of the panel. These panelists will be Mauricio Thomas King, the Director of Sustainability from Petrobras, Flavio Andrade, that will talk about the decarbonization in maritime support, Arnaldo Corbucci, the Director of Operations, that will talk about decarbonization in Brazilian ports, and Raul Portela will talk about the perspectives of green perspectives for the hiring of transportation vessels and support. These past people that I've mentioned, please come up to the stage and we offer you a round of applause. And Dr. Lillian Schaefer, you have the floor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a huge satisfaction to be here to start the second panel of the day for the energy sector and the Brazilian naval industry. Yesterday, in the opening of this seminar was conducted by the president of BNDES, the main financial player of our government and fosterer of projects that support this topic, and it deserves to be recognized. Climate emergency is real, and energy transition at sea is also very important. Global rules were determined, and Brazil has a powerful participation, whether it is by offering biofuels and accessible ones, or presenting technical projects and immediate actions for the amplification of its energy efficiency and especially its fleet of operational vessels. And this has motivated yesterday's session of the General Secretary of IMO, confirming this new world order in considering its peculiarities of the maritime sector, and obviously the commander of the Brazilian Marine was here to reaffirm the presence of Brazil's participation in this, and we also had the presence of other authorities and representatives of authorities that are connected to this supply chain for naval energy. I would like to thank our dear Admiral Ilks Barbosa that made this event possible and this moment where we have new ideas and are discussing the potential of Brazil in energy transition. I'd also like to thank FGV and BNDS for the invitation to be a moderator in this panel. We will talk about the decarbonization in the oil and gas sector and understanding the challenges and opportunities. And I would like to also greet Congresswoman Celia Jordão. She is a very important partner of ours. And moving on with our presentation, we will have the possibility of listening to Petrobras as the largest shareholder of the oil and gas sector in Brazil. And it represents about 70% of our industrial GDP. 90% of that economy happens in the maritime field. So that's the importance of the sector that has been developing and renewing. And it has a technological structure that is very, very powerful. Petrobras is the largest player and fosterer in deep water oil and gas. And we all have the certainty that Petrobras is again in time to bring to Brazil the possibility of development and growth of this energy transition industry. We will also hear a segment that has invested a lot of investments in the marine in the past 20 years. They have invested about 50% of the merchant marine was dedicated to the support vessels. We have over 250 vessels. They are excellent state-of-the-art vessels with innovative technologies, and they provide notoriety to Brazil and to the global market. We have the sixth largest fleet of OSVs in the world, the largest HTS fleet in the world, the fourth and most modern PSLV fleet in the world. So our support navigation of our ports also has a robust fleet, and that is imperious for the waterways, that is prepared to absorbing new technologies that will help with the goals that we have to our country. And at last, we have Equinor. It is a Norwegian company that has been operating in Brazil for over 20 years, strengthening Brazil's participation of other providers in the Brazilian coastline. And you can see in their profile the values and purposes to transform energy, and they are committed with low carbon emission and large energy production.
So these are our speakers for today. I would like to introduce the Director of Energy Transition and Sustainability of Petrobras, Professor Engineer Maurício Tomasquim. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a huge pleasure to be here at FGV. I was thinking about what to speak because there are many different subjects. I could talk about the decarbonization of our platforms, but I thought it would be more adequate to focus on how we are seeing the energy transition of the vessels. So I will focus on our view about this topic. Okay, I should uh, move on here, right? Probably yesterday you already saw this chart, but if you were not here yesterday, I think it is a good introduction. So this is the IMO is looking at the evolution of the navigation sector, the shipping sector. So the blue curve here indicates the business as usual scenario. So if you don't do anything, the emissions are going to be flat and with a light increased trend. The red line are the goals and the paths that we had by the definition of IMO in 2018. And the green line is the new goal that we have to reach net zero by 2050. So in this green line, we are seeing that the goal in 2030 to reduce 20% of the emissions in 2040. We have a bold mission to reduce 70% to reach net zero by 2050. So we are seeing that it is a very challenging trajectory and very ambitious. So how can we get there? This same uh, chart can be divided in two parts here. So the top part, the blue part, shows the reduction of the emissions that can be made by simple measures, measures from the demand side. And these green area are reductions that depend on the change of fuel. So in the blue area, I would mention, for example, actions of logistics and digitization. So we can mention here the reduction of the speed of the vessels that leads to an economy. The use of the vessels so they cannot be empty, to be always loaded. This is another way to reduce the emissions. The size of the ships. You can have an optimal size for the loads that you are or the cargo that you are transporting. This is a way to reduce and to have alternative routes. Nowadays, we have the possibility to use artificial intelligence to see, because of the wind, which one is the best route. So these type of measures allow a reduction of about 20% of the consumption. There is another array of changes that is from the demand side that there are different dynamics. For example, the optimization of the hull. So sometimes we have the hull that we always use, and now we are looking at different shapes of hulls. Lubrication with air. There is a bubble system that makes the vessel has less resistance and emits less and consume less fuels. The cleaning, for as increasing as amazing as it may sound, if you have a lot of if the vessel is dirty, it's going to consume more fuel. Improvements of the efficiency of the engines. So, for example, the use of heat. So, if there is a steam, that you can use that heat, and that increases the efficiency of the process. So, there are many different measures that allow economies of 20% in each one of them. This is looking at the demand side. Now looking at the supply side. We have two groups of measures here. The first one is the fuels, and there will be disputes between different fuels to see which one is going to allow the vessels to operate emitting less, and I'm going to talk about this later. And with this change, you can reach 100% of the reduction of the emissions. You just need to have fuels that do not emit and can have low carbon content. And there are other measures that I think it's further, but I think it would be possible as well. That is to capture the CO2 after the CO2 is being emitted. So I would say that this is a little bit more distant in our horizon. Now let's look at the fuel side that this has to do with Petrobras. How do we see that? By 2030, this gray or dark bar here is the participation of the bunker fuels, the fossil fuels, of the oil products in the shipping. So you can see it's about 80%, more than 80%. And there are different forecasts of different consultant companies, and all of them are more optimistic or less optimistic, but it's going to continue by 2030, the oil being the main supplier of fuels. Some of them see in the short run the role of biofuels and also LNG and ammonia. I'll talk about ammonia later, but this is only the vision that the sector has. To 2050, the oil, according to all the consultants, is going to decrease exponentially. And there is a different view about the future. In the last chart on your right, the chart shows that the average by 2050, and we can see that the green bar is the contribution of biofuels. That this is how much it varies. So in the forecast of less than 10% to 40%. Then we have the dark blue ammonia that is being seen as the greatest potential according to this view. It's not necessarily our view, and I'm going to explain why later. And then methanol, and finally hydrogen. So these are the views. We tried to make a multi-criteria analysis showing the advantages and disadvantages of each one of these potential fuels. The bunker fuel has a high energy density, it has technological maturity, it has availability and regulatory framework and infrastructure. The problem is that is your orange here, that is less favorable, that emits too much. So it fails in the criteria of the emission. The LNG is a little bit yellow, that is unfavorable here, but it also emits more. The advantage is that it has technological maturity, availability, and regulations. There is no other challenge of using LNG, but it's not a solution to decarbonize because it is still emits too much. And then we have the biofuels. The biofuels is dark green and light green. These are the most favorable colors. But in this diagram, so far, it is interesting because it reduces the emissions and it has energy density, it has technological maturity. It, it has a reasonable regulation. It can improve, of course, but it has availability not in all the areas of the planet. This availability of biodiesel is not well distributed, but it has a certain availability. And the other one is the HVO that we are investing in HVO plants, so we can use these uh, hydrated vegetable oil. And there is an issue that it is not yet available for, but we have two plants that will be ready by 2028. And then we have methanol. And the methanol is a fuel that we have to look very closely because it allows a complete decarbonization. It has a density that's not so good, but it's not like ammonia that has a low density. And it has an availability, but this is something that we can work on. And we have to build regulation and infrastructure. But ammonia and hydrogen, you can see that all the consultants are betting on ammonia. Ammonia presents more problems, especially in terms of energy density. They need high volumes in order to transport. Having said that, what are we doing at Petrobras? In the line of biofuels, we made two experiments. The first one in a vessel that crossed 14,000 kilometers, sailed 14,000 kilometers using bunker fuels with 10% of biodiesel. And that allowed a reduction of the emissions of about 7%. And it worked really well. The other test that was done in August 23, it was the mixture of bunker and 24% of biofuels. And the ship sailed 10,000 kilometers and it managed to reduce the emissions in 19%, almost 20%. Petrobras is not a pioneer in these experiments. In the port of Rotterdam, they have the B30 with 8 to 90% of the market there already uses B30. And in Singapore, the B24 in absolute terms is a little bit less than the amount used in Rotterdam, but since Singapore it's a huge port, proportionally it does not mean too much. To talk about methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen, we have to consider the cost of this hydrogen. And Brazil is well positioned because there is a study of Bloomberg that surprised me. It compares 28 markets regarding the cost of hydrogen by 2030. And to my surprise, Brazil is one of the 28 markets that will have the least cost for hydrogen. But the most surprising is not that this symbol here is the triangle and the diamonds. So that these are the blue and gray hydrogen. What is surprising that by 2030, according to this consultancy, the green hydrogen will be cheaper than the gray hydrogen that is the one produced from natural gas. If this is true, we are facing a disruptive thing because we have a huge demand of hydrogen, and this hydrogen is critical for the production of fuels and green ammonia and ethanol. What is the main advantage of Brazil of producing, for example, the methanol? In order to produce the green hydrogen, it is considered that the hydrogen is green if it has at least 90% of the energy coming from renewable sources. What is the advantage of Brazil? Is that in 2023, 21% that was renewable, non-equally distributed, but in northeast and the south are subsystems that meet these uh, criteria of renewability. But since we have a country that is totally integrated, we have an advantage to produce this hydrogen that is necessary to make the synthetic uh, materials. So the interesting thing is that Brazil have the wine distilleries. We have more than 400 uh, plants, and they issue the biogenic CO2. The biogenic CO2, joining the synthesis of the biogenic CO2 with the green hydrogen, you obtain the ethanol. So we have a unique condition because we have the green hydrogen that seems very competitive and a CO2 source that is biogenic hydrogen that is our distilleries. And it already has an international transport company that is already interested in showing that, and we are going to match a hydrogen plant with the biogenic hydrogen. So just to conclude here, what I wanted to conclude here is that most of the economy it's going to be decarbonized with electricity. The electricity, the electrification, will be the main vehicle of the decarbonization. But there are some sectors that is called to hard to abate sector that electricity cannot enter. So these sectors need molecules. So what are these sectors? The refining, petrochemical, fertilizers, and aviation transportation fuels. So we need to find those other fuels. So according to this vision, in the short term, I think biofuels will play this role. They have a great advantage. We have LNG, but in Brazil we do not have an LNG. We don't have abundant gas. The price is not so competitive, and I don't know if it is economically the best option. So biofuels seems to be. In the medium term, I think that methanol has everything it takes to take off. So I wouldn't discard ammonia and hydrogen because ammonia has one more problems that it was not solved yet. That if it leaks in a confined space, it can kill people.
So it is an issue that is not solved yet, maybe in the long term, but can you think of a closed space and there's a leak in the boat and it can be catastrophic? And I look further, and these companies, they look at ammonia on long term. So here I think we have a distinct point of view. But in general, Brazil, any of these alternatives is well positioned because we have a lot of fuel available, a lot of soil and water, so we can produce low cost biofuels abundantly. And we have possibilities with renewable energies to produce hydrogen that is the base for other fuels, methanol, ammonia, etc. So this is my message. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Professor, for your words. And these are incredible news for our country, our people, and to know that Petrobras has such great capacity to present new alternatives and is engaged in the oil industry, it will represent a very important share of the energy transition. We know that 90% of our oil and gas market comes from Petrobras, so great words. Thank you. We will now go to Flávio Andrade. He's the CEO of Ocean Pact. Ocean Pact acts on many areas of the supply chain of oil and gas, and it has as pillars the sustainability of the maritime environment. It was created in 2014, and it is an expert in responses to oil leaks in Brazil and in the world. Good morning. Good morning, Tamalskin, Arnaldo, Raul, my dear colleagues. Thank you, Admiral Ilkis, for this invitation. FGV, BNDES, the Marine. I thank everyone that made this event possible. So I brought a few slides to show you and to guide our conversation. I don't know if we'll have a debate after this, but this topic on energy transition, it's important to remember that Ocean Pact started as an environmental company. We had no ships 16 years ago, and now we have 28. So just to remember that back then, when we still had no ships, our mission was to help our customers to know, use, and explore the coasts and oceans and its wealths, to guaranteeing its protection and conservation. And our mission is still the same. And I'll try to show you what we do and a little bit of our maritime support. And just remember that in the oil and gas production supply, they have an irreplaceable work. It's impossible to have all of this production chain without them. To contextualize this, so there are many different types of ships with its crew that is specialized, doing many different services to make the oil and gas production possible. The Brazilian fleet, and we have in this graph, has grown a lot, and we can see that in the year of 2010 we had about 100 Brazilian ships. We now have 372. So out of the 435 vessels in Brazil, 372 are Brazilian and 63 are foreigns. So that shows a large effort from our part, of course, that using the merchant fund and the credit of BNDES and Petrobras support has made this growth possible, this amazing growth with state-of-the-art vessels that allow the production of oil that we have. And these vessels, in its large part, are 100% diesel fueled, but they have a propulsor with the and many other technologies, and diesel motors then use generators, and the generators that will pull the ships are electric. So Petrobras has for many years now, if I'm not wrong, since 2010 or 12, asking ships, the PSVs or the leak combat vessels, to be diesel and electric to have a higher flexibility, and we'll see how that happens. Okay, so in maritime support, we have 435 ships helping Brazil produce about 4 million barrels a day at sea. That is a lot. Our fleet has grown, like we had seen on that graph. With the participation of PROEFA. So our fleets have grown, but it hasn't paid off yet. The average age of our fleet is of 15 years. It is a fleet that's relatively new. The useful life of a ship is of 30. Right, so going back to the topic of today's subject, what we have today is looking at maritime support. We have alternate biofuels of immediate application. So we have HVO that can be used either pure or in a diesel. Biodiesel that can also be mixed. That can, in proportions that can have been tested and verified, and it has a cut in the emissions that, of course, that we know that energy transition is urgent because climate change is a reality. So we have to keep that in mind. I just say that maritime support is a hard to abate business, but especially those that have a very large autonomy. The pre-salt layer of Brazil is very far from the coast, so we need autonomy to operate efficiently. So if you can use one ship instead of 3, that is great. But let's go back to the theme here. So the increase of efficiency, we have many solutions here, many options for solutions. So the reduction of friction, clean hook, and weather forecast, and the knowledge of the sea flow. I think that everyone can infer that a ship that is navigating at 10 knots will use a certain amount of fuel, but if they speed down, the consumption will also decrease. So the ideal speed for each vessel, each ship is important. Also, wind can also help for this propulsion, and granulars with a different type of technology. Okay, so batteries for peak shaving. Those ones that are those ships that are diesel, that are fueled by diesel, they have a redundant demand that has generators with an exact number. You either have one or two or three or four generators. You cannot turn one and a half generators. So you have this peak shaving in a way that the generators will constantly be with their most effective load. So they have that weight that is ideal. So it will either be charging its batteries, and if you need 1.8 generators, you can turn two generators on, and that point 0.2 generators will then charge the other batteries that are not being used, and so on. So you can use, let me just speed up a little. So the peak shaving batteries, besides that, we have smaller ships. You don't need a ship with 20 researchers and 20 researchers in such a large structure. You can have a smaller ship that is operated by land. You might need the ROV pilots, but they can do that from land, onshore. Offshore. So you can think of energy transition and the neutralization of emissions in blue carbon. For example, when the reforestation of the mangue and so on. So looking at a medium to long term, we think that maritime support will have space to work in other sources of energy, so wind energy, offshore wind energy, and we think that that is coming to Brazil. We know that it has a higher cost, but we have to start working on it when it is going to be necessary. Other maritime energies and the extended lifespan and the biofuels that have longer maturation, like hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol. We have the same concerns with risks of having ammonia on board. And something that's very important is that preserving maritime environments. We are in the UN Ocean Decade, and we participated in a conference in Barcelona about a month ago where the concept of nature positive has been opposed to net zero. So we're not supposed to be net zero anymore. We have to be nature positive. And just a few images. This is an autonomous boat to pull contention barriers without risking the crew. So this is not ours. This is a sail drone. It's an example of a sailboat that's used to collect data depending on the sensors that you put on it, and it is operated remotely, and it's naturally net zero. These gliders, we have 4 of them in the Santos Bay, and they measure the acoustics of Santos Bay for Petrobras. This is an example of a ship that has a sail. This is a project for us to install the sails on the leak emergency boat ship, because it stayed docked for a long time, just waiting for an emergency, and we can save a lot of fuel with it. This is the example of a project from 1968 that's a sailboat, but they were able to put a foil in it and to show you that we can extend the lifespan of our assets. And this is a reforestation in the Bahia, in the Guanabara Bay, of a of a mangrove, and we're studying how much of capture we can do with CO2, and we're using sensors to do that. Thank you very much. Thanks, Flavio. Excellent. Your explanation, and the navigation sector of maritime support has innovation as its main characteristic, and so congratulations for your excellent work on Guanabara Bay. Now let's listen to COO Carlo Albucci. He's also a naval engineer, and they are one of the largest naval companies here in Brazil that has a rich portfolio in logistics, maritime agency, support to development and research of oil and gas and naval industry. Thank you, Ronaldo. Thank you, Lillian. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities of decarbonization in port support. So, for those that don't know, these are the toll ships for the docking and undocking of the ships, and take the crew and food and also oil that will supply these ships. And Wilson Sons is present in Brazil since 1837. So we have been through one energy transition from coal in vessels to heavy oil that used to be the one used in 1850. So we do have a history in that sense. We operate about 80 whole boats, and we are operating in 25 ports in Brazil, and we have been trying many technologies for the decarbonization process. And in this mapping for new constructions and operations of our vessels, we have done an analysis on many technologies that have been mentioned by Professor Tomalskin and Flavio, since building hybrid vessels with battery banks and 100% electric tugboats and HVO, ethanol, LNG, excuse me. And until 2030, we believe that until 2030, we have to work on efficiency using from tug ships the land energy, and as Dino has mentioned, the monitoring of the fleet that optimizes the speed on from one place to another, and also the optimization of the Hulk process. And we understand that in the very near future, we will be using biodiesel and HVO. That is a drop in fuel, and we would be able to replace it instantaneously if we had it in the market at a fair price. We would immediately be able to use it. Now moving on to the next slide. Wilson and Sons has been using land energy in many Brazilian ports, and I'd say that right now we are able to supply to half of our operations, and this week we will start in the port of Açu land, energy, and all of the tugboats that we have there. We do a fleet monitoring in our Central of Operations that is located in Santos for over 10 years. And with this monitoring, we were able to reduce in 5% the consumption of our fleet. We have used in the last tugboats that we have acquired a very innovative uh, project, and you will see a picture of this vessel. And this project allows us a reduction of up to 14% in the fuel consumption. And we have been looking for the approval with ANP for the mix of biodiesel, and Petrobras had an authorization for that. But we, from the commercial point of view of use, the possibility to use biodiesel B7 that is used in trucks nowadays.
And it thinks that is going to be 10 and be 14. And this use would allow the reductions that we consider up to 5% in the consumption in the emissions of greenhouse gases. The use that we will see very promising in short time is the HVO. HVO, depending on how much it is manufactured, we can have a reduction of 74 to 90% of the emissions. There is a pilot project that will bring HVO from United States that is going to allow us reduce the emissions by 50%. This is a project that we have partnership with Port of Açu, and we expect that soon we will have the availability at Petrobras for this type of tools or fuels. This is an art and a picture of the last 6 tugboats that we built. These double keels that are put in the hull in the bow allows the reduction of consumption by 14% of these tugboats. These are high-powered tugboats that operates in the port of Açu in São Luís de Maranhão, in the port of Vale, and also in Santos. We envision, as I said, that the advantages and disadvantages of using some fuels and some technologies for the port support. Biodiesel is a fuel that is easy adaptable. HVO is a drop-in. So we have the availability of the Famer here in Brazil, the normal biodiesel that could be mixed with the fossil fuel biodiesel, and it has a good energy density. The HVO is just like the molecule is just like the diesel, the marine gas oil, and FAME has an good energy density. So do we need the support of the government and the entities? Is the regulation for the use of these fuels, and we have to seek quantities and better prices for HVO. HVO last year, we would be able to bring to Brazil 5 times the price of the maritime diesel. Nowadays, we estimate that this will be 70% more expensive here in Brazil. So it is a huge advancement. We also study ethanol that has a good availability here. It can be stored in conventional tanks, and it can be used in flex fuel engines. There are engines like this with ethanol in the world, and not with ethanol, but we have discussions with the engine manufacturers that this will be possible in the near future. We have an additional challenge of the tugboats that it has a lower heat power, and we need a volume in the storage tank. And this is the same problem that is going to happen with the PSVs and the OSVs. But it is a well-known fuel here in Brazil with developed technology. Electrification is an important possibility. It has almost a zero emission depending on the way that you can produce the batteries. It has an energy efficiency of electricity and low operational costs. But as an advantage, the cost of construction of a vessel with batteries is too high. In a tugboat, just as a perspective between building a tugboat with conventional fuels and another one with a bank of batteries that can produce one third of the necessary power, it costs 70% more expensive. So it is still a challenge to us. Another important point here is how the port infrastructure can adapt to the electrification. We need places to load efficiently and quickly. The LNG is a mature technology. You have the possibility of having new engines. It's a low cost fuel, but as ethanol, it has a lot of risks to safety. The safety training of our crews and the risk that they can be exposed to with the operation with ethanol and LNG and ammonia is too high. So I think my time is up, so I want to thank Admiral Wilkes and my colleagues in the panel. Thank you, Arnaldo. It's excellent to see the advances by the port, but there's no single solution. There are many different alternatives that are being employed, and certainly this is going to put Brazil and its fleet once again in a uh, standout position. So, Raul, now it's the time of Equinor operating Brazil since 2011. It's a major operator of the oil and gas industry. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, my fellow members of the panel, Mauricio, Arnaldo, and Flavio. It is a pleasure to represent Equinor in this important forum, so I want to thank for the invitation of the organization of the event. And before anything, it's important to explain what Equinor is. Equinor is not anything related to horse. Equinor is a Norwegian company founded in 1972 with the presence in more than 30 countries. We have about 22,000 employees, of course, with a huge concentration in Norway. It is a Norwegian company, but where we count on 8,000 providers, and these providers are our partners, so we can deliver the strategy of the company. When we think about Equinor in Brazil, Equinor is present in Brazil since 2001, but it is operating since 2010 when we started to come the Pilgrims and World Cup in 2010 and 2011 with the first oil and Peregrino in April of 2001. Peregrino is our legacy asset. It is an asset that produces since 2011. It is an asset that no one in the oil and gas industry believed that it could be operated, that would be economically viable, and we are proving that it is possible to generate and to produce these assets economically. And it is the cash generator for the development of Bacalhau, that is our next asset, and Raia. Bacalhau is an FPSO. It's a basin where the FPSO is also called Bacalhau, expected to arrive in the end of the year. So far, the largest FPSO in the world, and Raia is a field that the first gas oil is expected to 2028 and is going to supply 28% of the Brazilian demand of gas. When we look at the transition, energy transition, I'm going to explain very quickly about the strategy. We see very clearly that Equinor started in a partnership with Statec in solar plants in the northeast, in Apodi, in Ceará, in Mandolim, in the Rio Grande do Norte. We had the start of the operation last month. In the beginning of uh, January, we acquired Rio Energy that is operating an onshore plant, an offshore wind plant, this Rio Babylonia, and it has a portfolio, an interesting portfolio of projects and a group of experienced professionals that is extremely valuable to us. What is the strategy of the company and how to explain the strategy of Equinor easily to our employees and to all the stakeholders that work with us? Basically, we have three pillars. One is the optimization of our gas portfolio, oil and gas portfolio. What does that mean? We work with fields with the next generation. We have to produce more with a less carbon intensity. Growing renewables and the low carbon solutions. And I'm talking about carbon capture and ammonia and green hydrogen, where we are working on this in Europe, especially UK and Norway, but we have the plans to bring this gradually to Brazil. An important point in this strategy, and this is something that I like to uh, highlight, is that we have the commitment that by 2030, 50% of the capex of Equinor will be invested in energy transition in a profitable way. So if you do not have opportunity to invest in energy transition, the investment in oil and gas will be less and less. So that's why there is a huge group prospecting solutions so we can work and help in this process of energy transition. Now, going to the point of this panel, what are we doing concretely to move away from the paper and, in fact, to reduce our emissions in the maritime support? There is one point that we have a PSV in Brazil working with hybrid batteries, and we are concluding the conversion of the second one. So these are two PSVs. For Petrobras is nothing. So when for Equinor it means 30% of our fleet will be working with hybrid vessels. Besides that, we have three vessels that we already talked with our partners. We painted the hull with a special ink with silicone base. So okay, what is the advantage of that? This reduces in 60% the consumption of diesel and the emissions. But what in fact brings and improves the process in terms of return on the investments is the part of monitoring and optimization of activities. The optimization of our operations, and I'm including here that it's nothing worse than a supply vessel arriving at a platform and operates in DP waiting for the position. So this burns a lot of fuels and generates a lot of emissions. So what are we working on? With the concept of pit stop as Formula One. The vessel will only enter the 500-meter region with the prepared cargo, the deck team prepared, so everybody can operate and leave the 500 meters areas and remove the DP. So that saves fuels and saves emissions. And we implemented through our partners the monitoring of gas consumption online with each one of the generators. We managed to identify the maximum velocity to work more efficiently in terms of generation and consumption of fuel. So what is the problem? We know that it's very difficult to control the offshore activities. And the responsible for the drilling for the operations says full speed to the fields. This full speed costs a lot. What we need is, okay, we are going full speed, but this is the limit that we are reaching because this is the limit that is economically viable to do it in this operation. And besides that, to generate as minimum fuel as possible. But what are the next steps in Brazil? And the good thing is to just to speak for last that everybody already said what I was going to say. So it's important to repeat that in the short term, we understand that the blend HVO and MGO is an effective solution for availability and requires little or no modification in the vessels. So we started doing that already in Norway, and we intend to start this soon here in Brazil. Regardless of the cost, it's more to check if the reduction of emissions justify the process. And in the long run, we envision that the second generation ethanol with it brings more advantages to Brazil because it's easy to transport and to store, and the logistic infrastructure that it exists, and the low toxicity and being competitive in terms of price. But it demands homework to be made, and we are working with Wärtsilä for a process of checking in the modification of the engines. So we have a huge group here in Brazil already working with providers to understand if this will be applicable in the short and medium term. So what are we doing in Norway? And in Norway, the number of resources that we have of research and development for that is significant. We have a big group, and this is the advantage of being a global company because we understand what can be applied in Brazil or what was identified successfully, and we can bring it here. Biodiesel, and we are testing HVO in supply vessels. Now, what we understand in the middle and the long run, ammonia, we have a tender for 2 supply vessels to use ammonia as a fuel. This is already existing. This is happening as we speak. And in the next 2 months, we believe this will be concluded. As I said, we have a big research and development group addressing the points that are open not only to Equinor but for a whole industry. The safety issues that were mentioned here, the safety on board, solutions for bunkering, and the dispersion of ammonia. And lastly, the infrastructure of the supply chain. We cannot put vessels and not being able to replenish them. And we have 2 agreements signed with Eidvik Offshore for the conversion of PSV and Wärtsilä in Norway, where we are testing an engine with combustion supplied by ammonia. This is already happening. And we talked about methanol. Methanol is also critical to us. Methanol is something that today it can be implemented from the long run, and our midstream and post refinery area is working concretely with this, and we have a tender in the market for 4 tankers of dual fuel with methanol. And then methanol engines are already available, and I'm not going to be a hypocrite. Equinor is the largest methanol producer in Europe, so we have a particular interest in this field to be successful. Time's up. Thank you. Thank you, Raul. We have a big opportunity to listen to Petrobras, the largest operator of oil and gas sector in Brazil. Equinor, with its capacity of bringing technology and implementation of new equipment and searching energy efficiency. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions because the speakers used all the time of they had to speak. But I believe the message today of the oil and gas industry advancing the decarbonization and energy efficiency is already a reality. We saw that there are many measures being taken and the companies are engaged in bringing new technologies, and Brazil is already important in the oil and gas sector, and we are certain that we will remain important in the production of energy in the world for low carbon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, the members of the first panel that will be in the group picture now. Professor Mauricio, there is a group picture. Say cheese. Thank you very much. Now moving away from the fuels. Now we are going to nuclear power. I invite the technical director of the Brazilian Association for the Development of Nuclear Activities and coordinator of the Commission of the Blue Amazon, Mr. Leonardo Santos Guimarães, for the address Nuclear Energy for the Energy Transition at the Sea, Advances and Perspectives. Mr. Leonardo, please.
If you could please put on my presentation on the screen, please. I would like to thank for the opportunity because we're talking about energy transition at sea, and we can talk about nuclear energy, and that's in terms of generation of energy in the whole world, it's the second largest producer of electricity, and it has a growing tendency. So I think I'll be short, but I will try to give you this very simple message is that if we're trying deep decarbonization, there's no way to get there without a significant help from nuclear energy. But we'll talk specifically of some aspects that are very relevant. First thing, nuclear energy was born for the sea. And that's quite curious, but the first reactor that generated electricity in the world, usable energy, was the propulsion of the first submarine in a launch in the world. And the Nauticus, the team that prototyped Nauticus was in 1954. The team that had as its leader Admiral Rickover was the first electricity generator in 1958. And it's amazing how they were able to do so much in such a short period of time back then. And ship and port is the most modern operating power mill in the United States. So nuclear energy was born for the sea. And nuclear industry nowadays, it has been through a significant change, that is the ascension of SMR, that are modulated reactors that are trying to reduce the uncertainties and costs for capital placement of large nuclear mills. But before doing that, they saw a wide range of non-conventionally providing electricity, but also for other applications, especially applications in sectors of hard to abate sector, that and the maritime sector is one of them. So the ascension of SMR represents nowadays the future of nuclear industry that has been very much pulled because of the energy safety considerations, because of its characteristics, and the example of energy uncertainty because of geopolitical reasons, and other uses that SMR allow us to execute goes from cement industry to steel industry and data centers that were mentioned previously on the last panel. The exponential growth of energy used by artificial intelligence in these data centers, and also household heat and cooling. So it's possible to do that using these small modular reactors. And at sea, there are at least 10 projects nowadays of SMR application, small modular reactors, to the maritime industry in general. And we see that there are at least 5 important applications for nuclear power plants, and the most important one is the naval propulsion. It's the most evident one, but there are other applications, like for example, the subsea energy generation for E&P or O&G operations. And that has been developed especially by Russia with the interest of oil exploitation in the Arctic. And theoretically, that could also be applied here in Brazil in ultra deep waters. That is what Petrobras has been trying to do. And the other one is energy, offshore energy generation in floating platforms, because we have a limitation for potential that we could free from these restrictions by nuclear energy. Another topic that was recently commented in the previous panel is the energy for port operations and the essential of port industrial complexes that could be provided of electricity by floating nuclear power plants. And the third thing is the synthetic fuel production. And we heard about the e-diesel and aviation fuels. And we talk about the production of these fuels, but usually we don't really discuss the energy for the production of these fuels. So there's a positive perspective of nuclear energy to be really the engine for production of these biofuels in large scales. And this vision of the future is that SMRs are able to provide electricity to offshore industrial complex and even subsea units. And I think we can say that that onshore nuclear power plants can then transform into smaller plants and then can be transformed into platform power plants. They can become an intermediary power plant. It's not on shore or in or subsea, so that can be also tried out, and also the subsea energy. So the propulsion, the nuclear propulsion for ships, we have over 180 reactors moving 140 ships and submarines in 6 different countries. And these are the icebreakers. That's the Hope ships in Siberia. And those are the only ones that are able to reach isolated industrial communities that are on the north coast of Siberia. The container ships, the Katskirovsky cruisers, and the nuclear in the Guanabara Bay. But we did that with merchant ships that had no commercial success, but did have a technical success. And merchant ships, we have the Savannah, that's American, Mutsu, that's Japanese, and a German one. And we are reuptaking that discussion with a series of new projects and companies, and we're proposing solutions for naval propulsion for large ships. And that's very interesting. This is a Chinese project from for a huge container holder that operates in high speeds. And nuclear reactors, they have a very interesting importance for the oil and gas production, either at subsea or docked in platforms. And it's interesting because a problem that Petrobras has, for example, is how to treat the pre-salt CO2 emitters. And so if you had a subsea solution for that, uh, you would see a large amount of money being saved. But for that, you would need subsea technologies, and so there are many uses that we can apply this here, and there are many projects towards this from Russian projects, French projects, and the Russian ones are perhaps the most advanced ones because Russia has this problem with the Arctic exploitation. It's very different from Petrobras because here we have ultra deep waters, but in the Arctic, the waters are relatively shallow, but they are covered with ice, which makes the exploitation from the technological point of view a lot harder. Now, the offshore energy for E&P and O&G operations have been developed by MIT in the United States, and they are proposing the offshore nuclear power plant. And the other application that we see is energy for port operation and industrial complexes, and that can be done in a decarbonized way via floating nuclear power plants. We have a recent model that started operating, and it's in third operational year. The floating power mill that is associated to an industrial complex located in Siberia. But that's not new. This image here, the Sturgis, excuse me, it's an American ship from the Navy that during the Vietnam War, it was docked in the port of Panama to guarantee the occluding system for the transfer of material from West Coast to East Coast in a situation of war, especially with logistics costs that have increased in Panama. And so that is a fragility point for the American government. Another concept also for port operations that is being developed in Korea are the ground-based power plants. And it is particularly important for countries that have a high demographic density that is sort of difficult for these mills. So you can have these power plants at deep sea, and is conducted and is then sunk at that place.
As I said, this is being developed in Korea, but it's a very old idea. With the image that is, and I'm showing it is an American project from the 50s. So as we saw the production of low carbon fuels, we show that very proudly because last year we had the Brazilian Nuclear Olympics as an award very similar to what Sobena presented here. And the award winners was the Amana project. That is exactly a project to produce fuels. And the synthetic fuels based on nuclear energy and the production of the salinization of water simultaneously to this process. The production of salinization and the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere and the necessary electrolysis for the production of the synthetic fuels. But certainly there are many difficulties to be faced in the maritime environment that are solvable, that there is a fleet with 150 reactors operating in the sea. So according to the difficulty and the characteristic of the place, it has to do with the the access, and they are limited, and the high cost and the high initial costs, especially when we talk about installation in remote places. And recently, to face this challenge and to foster the contribution of nuclear plants for the decarbonization of the maritime sector, it was the NEMO, Nuclear Energy Maritime Organization. The objective is to make this bridge between IMO and the International Atomic Energy Agency to make a technical regulation that allowed the expansion of these many applications that we saw previously. IMO was created not 1 month, and NEMO was created not 1 month ago, and at least there is one Brazilian company associated with NEMO, that is Amazon. The Navy, Brazilian Navy, is already associated with NEMO. And NEMO has everything to do with Brazil because there is a naval propulsion project that was already approached here in other moments. So the nuclear power has many challenges and opportunities for the Brazilian maritime sector. And the opportunities are huge. Opportunities in terms of floating plants to support the port operations, in the production of oil and gas, and also the supply of electric energy in remote locations. This was mentioned by the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and there was a reaction of many people. And the floating plants and the microreactors in the Amazon, this is crazy. But we have to remember that in the Amazon today, the solution that is being used is to transport diesel oil in barges of some for hundreds of kilometers. And that has a high cost and represents a higher environmental risk than what a microreactor would. So we have to move away from the paradigm of fear and think about the paradigm of the future. So here in Brazil, there is a favorable infrastructure that is unique, because this is a country that develops the activity and has implemented a nuclear industry that produces fuels, and it develops a nuclear submarine that explores oils in deep waters, and one of the largest oil producers. And it's a country with the largest deposits of metallic dioxides in the bottom of the sea. I don't know if you heard about the elevation of the Grand River. So the future perspectives are positive, and this is around Brazil in a very synergic way. It's up to us to have the competence to use these opportunities. But as I said, there are many challenges. I believe that the biggest challenge is the public acceptance and the risk perception. And this pursues the industry since the original sin. The nuclear power was well known for the people by the Holocaust, and since this original sin, we are being charged, we are being requested by that. And the effort is for many years to show that the atoms are for peace. If they use it for the war, we also use acid to make war and salt to make explosives. So these are the aspects that I think I ran out of time, right? Another aspect besides public acceptance that is relevant is the regulation. And this is where NEMO comes, searching to establish a regulatory framework for these applications on a worldwide level. And this is an important challenge. But this can be fitted in the modular reactors that needs to have their specific regulation. And the future is open to our imagination. Since I have little time, I have some pictures that seems sci-fi, but the future of humanity in the long-term horizon will be the exploration of the bottom of the ocean. The bottom of the ocean is closer than the surface of Mars, and it is only possible with nuclear power as well. But anyway, there is a perspective of a more use of the sea and the bottom of the ocean, and this exploration is only viable with the use of nuclear power. There is no other technical solution. So we can imagine many solutions. I won't have time to show my scientific fiction collection, but we will end with this conclusion that the perspective of nuclear power in the sea is really important. It has to be considered, especially here in Brazil, that Brazil gathers. Besides these characteristics, we have this synergy, and if we believe that, as I believe, and more people are believing, that there is an important role for nuclear energy in the world, we cannot miss this opportunity that we are well adapted and well supplied with means to be a leader in this new technological revolution that is dragged by the decarbonization and the energy transition. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to bring these words to you. We hope that in the next energy transition event, we can speak in more details about the topic that is really interesting and provider of future. Thank you. Thank you, Director Leonam Guimarães. I inform you that your picture was already taken, so that's why you don't need to take the group picture now. Now the last panel of this morning before lunch, a magic words here, with the topic green fuels. The moderator will be Mr. Marcelo Moreira, partner at Agroeconi Consultancy, and he's going to introduce the speakers. And I'm going to announce now. Mr. Peter Jamerson, Mr. Camilo Ades, Dr. Joaquim Seabra, and Dr. Ronaldo Carmona. A round of applause to our panelists, please. With the floor, Mr. Marcelo Moreira. It's always a challenge to be the last panel before lunch, so we will try to be quick and efficient in the communication here. Initially, I want to thank the organization of the event, and it's an absolutely honest gratitude for FGV and BNDES. I think in the BNDES, I was an intern in the bank, and I'm seeing my old boss. I don't see her now here in the audience, but why am I saying that? Why am I saying that it is an honest thank you? Because the name of this panel is Green Fuels. And it's really clear that Brazil will have to lead this process. If Brazil doesn't lead that, it's not going to be the most correct way. And I'm going to tell you two cases that we acted in the coordination. The regulation is important, but who writes this regulation? They are the experts. Who are these experts? How do they organize themselves? I'm going to tell you two stories, two anecdotes. And I would say that is ridiculous, these situations, in the case you are not careful. The first one's under the coordination that I participate. In one of the internal meetings, we were talking about carbon in the soil and biofuels. And when they are properly managed, they can reduce the carbon while substituting the fossil fuels, and we can remove carbon from the atmosphere, storing this in the soil. We presented a group of researchers to be presented, And I heard, no, this is not valid because this study is about carbon and the soil is done by Brazilians. So we cannot take in this seriously. And of course, that didn't go through. We managed to take them forward and they are being considered. But this is a situation that if we are not careful, this is how this is treated in the wording of the regulation. At the IMO, we had an earlier activity. There is another anecdote that the Navy will recognize that we will have a group of experts that will need to be qualified to write this international regulation. Brazil had to fight for this group to be geographically balanced, and it wouldn't be only researchers from a certain region. So we have to lead. If we don't lead, another an important point is, besides the geographic balancing, we needed to have a gender balance, and this is important. Our team, our delegation was full of competent women, and our team in our company is full of competent women. I was talking to uh, Mr. Seabra here, besides me. He told me that there are many women students in the energy planning sector. So I'm very happy to have Brazil as a leader. So we have to continue that. And this event is critical for us to organize ourselves and to have a strong coordination and articulation. Okay, now I'll pass the floor to our first presentation. We will have our keynote speaker, Peter. Peter is the executive director and partner of the Copenhagen office of the Copenhagen Group, leader of sustainability and climate sector in infrastructure, cities and BCG infrastructure, and he works with customers of industrial assets and maritime transportation focused on green transition. Peter also has an experience in a leadership position in important companies of medtech from Denmark, responsible for innovation, and a career at the Royal Navy. Okay, the floor is yours.
Bom dia. And that's where my Portuguese stops and I switched to English. So, as was just explained, my career actually started in the British Royal Navy. And in the Royal Navy, I drove nuclear submarines around the world. And I remember very vividly looking through a periscope from the nuclear submarine and actually seeing the smokestacks coming from ships before we actually saw the ships themselves. Fast forward 10 years, I now find myself actually trying to get rid of those smokestacks. So all my colleagues in the Navy now are cursing what we're trying to do because they used to use that for their advantage. So as you've heard over the course of these 2 days, the maritime industry is going through a real transition. That transition we've seen before in the industry, from sail to combustion engines, containerizations, and how now here we are at a very different point. When you look at the Chinese word change, it's made up of two symbols. Those symbols, one being fear and risk, and the other being opportunity. And I do believe, and from the work that I'm doing at the moment, looking at Brazil, I believe there is a huge opportunity here for Brazil to take the opportunity in this transition and in this crisis. And what I want to do today is talk to you and give you an outside-in perspective of why I believe that opportunity is there for you. Now let's see if I can get this technology to work as well. And I'll do that through 2 steps. Firstly, I'll just talk about the context of which Brazil is operating in at the moment and how that plays out in the global maritime scene. I'll then talk about why specifically here as a country you're on the prime position to take opportunity of this. But then I'll also bring some reality to the situation, because whilst the numbers look great, the reality of getting things done is very different. So, My work in the last 5 years on this topic has changed from having discussions with people in the technical departments, in the operations departments, to now, 5 years later, it is now discussions with CEOs and board members. I found myself last December in Dubai at the COP event, seeing what has never happened before. 6 of the biggest shipping companies, CEOs, standing together, agreeing on something. Not competing, but agreeing on something. And there they were talking about their decarbonization strategies. That is a fundamental shift in the industry. We now have those competitors actually working together. So this transition creates a huge opportunity. This is a graph, we call it a marginal abatement curve. On the x-axis, you see all the levers that allow you to decarbonize the maritime industry. On the y-axis, you see the cost of that decarbonization. The maritime industry has been absolutely experts at decarbonizing for the last 50, 60 years. But we haven't called it decarbonization. Why? Because we've always been trying to minimize our fuel usage. So what we found in the industry at the moment is we have gone a long way. And on this graph, a long way is to where it starts to cost money, where these new initiatives and these new technologies start to go above the x-axis. It starts to cost. The challenge is if the industry really wants to decarbonize and not just play around with it, the future has to be fuels and green fuels. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that in a moment. The other thing to bear in mind, and this is a phrase that's used in Europe very much, is the cheapest energy is the energy that you don't use. So we need to continue with these efficiency improvement moves so that when we put these expensive green fuels in the ships, actually we're using as little of those as possible. The way I describe fuels at the moment sits really into these 3 buckets. One is around drop-in fuels. We see that in the industry. You've heard about some of these that are being used, up to around 25% by volume of drop-in. Those come from biodiesels or second-generation ethanol. You then have what I call the growing area here, and that's around biofuels based on residual feedstock. And this is where Brazil's opportunity is, and I'm going to dig deeper into it a little. But that will allow us to create bio-based methanol and also bio-based LNG. And then finally, this nirvana that the industry has been spending a lot of time talking about is hydrogen-based fuels. That's many years ahead of us at the moment. We went out together with the Global Centre for Maritime Decarbonization in Singapore and asked 128 owner-operators, some of the biggest fleet owners in the world, what their challenges were going to be when it comes to future fuels. Of those 128 people, we divided them into 3 buckets. Those front runners, the CMAs, the Maersk's of the world that are able to spend millions on dual-fuel methanol vessels. Then there are those followers, those smart people that are thinking, actually, I might be able to make some money from that, so I might start doing some stuff. And then this other group that we call conservatives, those that are only doing something if they're being forced to do it by regulation. But what is consistent amongst all those 3 groups is this challenge around access to green fuel, but also, importantly, the economics of those green fuels. And therefore, the economics, I believe, and the availability is going to be the key challenge for this industry to tackle. Now, giving you some specifics, when we start looking at the order book for all the dual-fuel methanol vessels that are being planned, we can see the fuel demand up until 2030. The key message here is there is going to be a supply-demand imbalance, at least until 2030, 2035. What does that mean? In a market-based economy, that means that fuel is going to be able to leverage a premium, which means a lot of money is going to be made by those people that are making that green fuel. The other interesting thing is looking at how the cost of those fuels are going to develop. I talked about, on the right-hand side of this graph earlier, these e-fuels, these things that are out in the distance. At the moment, these are not economically viable for the maritime industry to absorb. But what is interesting, at least until that 2030, 2040 period, is the role that biofuels are going to place in it. I often get asked the question, so what's the winning fuel in the maritime industry? That is the wrong question. The question is what is the fuel tapestry that we're going to see, and how am I, as a country or an owner and operator, fit into that tapestry? And we'll come to that in a moment. But very much we're on a journey at the moment. We're going to see the increase in biofuels. We're then going to start to see these new biofuels emerge at scale. The key enabler here being regulation, something that has teeth that forces people to move. And then finally, towards 2040, 2050, then we'll see e-ammonia and e-methanol start to play out. So that's a little bit the future. It's around biofuels for the next couple of decades, and then we'll see e-fuels start to step in. And that's when we start talking about the opportunity for Brazil. So, as a nation, you have the largest volume of biomass in the world, around 10% of the volume. What does that mean? That means if you get it right, you can utilize that biomass. In particular, you have access, because of your sugarcane production, access to very cheap and very clean residual resilience. If we put that into context, if you can sell that fuel and you can put that on the market, not just for Brazil, but actually export it, you can potentially have a market size of between 25 and 50 billion US dollars from the residual from your sugarcane industry alone. I think that's an opportunity worth exploring. Why is that interesting? Because the price that you, as Brazil, would end up paying and costing you to actually produce it is one of the cheapest in the world, because of the innate situation that Brazil is in when it comes to biogenic sources. There's only one country from a cost perspective that can produce it cheaper than Brazil, and that's Chile. Take away the USA, because they've got a very unfair advantage at the moment with their IRA Act, which we're likely to see change potentially in the elections at the end of this year. So Brazil is in a unique position. The question then is, why do we not just jump into it? We went out and spoke to about 50 of the leading maritime organizations around the ecosystem, not just shipping companies, but also fuel producers, port developers. And we asked the question, well, what's stopping us? You know, what is it actually in the way for us making this green transition and making these green fuels available? Two of the key things that came out on the top around technology and supply chain was very much about the infrastructure bottlenecks. So yes, I can set up my production facility, but how do I make sure I can get the biogenics to that source? How do I make sure I can then move it from production facilities to ports? How do I make sure I can actually bunker these fuels? That is where at least the industry isn't sure how they're going to solve this problem. And why? Because it's not just about one individual making a difference. It's actually about collaboration across the value chain. The other one that I want to call out is very much the situation the world is in at the moment when it comes to economies, and how high interest rates are actually at the moment forcing a lot of green fuel projects to become not economically viable. So with that in mind, the question is what does Brazil do? So I see 5 things here, 5 things that really as a nation, as the organizations are in this room, that need to be overcome to actually get to that potential that we've just talked about. One is to make sure that you secure through demand and through regulation, you actually support the transition. So that's the role that you're playing in the IMO, to make sure that Brazil isn't negatively impacted by the carbon emission taxes that are coming. And also look at regulation locally as well. What can you do to accelerate this industry? The other thing would to be build out the value chain that I just talked about before, from your sugarcane production all the way to ships and the way to export that. The other challenge we face is the finance gap. Financial institutions at the moment look at investment in green fuels. They see a very risky business. Why? Because there's nobody at the moment that's willing to sign an offtake agreement. So we need to think about finance, and we need to find a way of stimulating that flow of equity into this industry and promote a different risk appetite. The other thing is really to promote this ecosystem and this collaboration move. This sounds easy, but it's not. We see some initiatives around the world, like the Green Corridors initiatives. To be honest, those are moving as slow as snails at the moment. We need to find a way of working across the ecosystem so that we can each find value from the partnerships that we are creating. And then the other thing is, let's make sure that we work with the demand side on this. So the shipping companies, but not just the shipping companies, the cargo owners as well. Because it's the cargo owners, Scope 3 emissions, that this nation has the ability to solve. So, 5 minutes? Perfect. So if I was to paint a picture, if I was to stand here in 2050, there could potentially be 5 things here that we could all stand here and be proud of. One of those is around how global shipping. You have the opportunity with the fuel production here to potentially decarbonize and provide at least 10% of the world's green fuels opportunity. You have the opportunity to create an industry of more than $25 billion. You also have the opportunity to make sure energy flows in the right places so that these residual biomasses aren't used to burn in power stations. They're actually used to fuel your maritime industry. The other thing is, why not start using the biogenic CO2 and start exporting that around the world? You have nations in the world that have great green electricity and green hydrogen production, but they don't have the biomass. So how do you start trading that? And then finally, if you manage to achieve this industry and create this green future, you actually have the ability not just to sort out your own emissions, but actually contribute to the overall decarbonization of the world, decarbonizing and actually removing GHG emissions of about the size of Spain or Taiwan. So I think in summary, huge opportunity, big challenges, and I guess that's what the rest of this panel is here to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Passar agora a palavra para o...
I will now pass the floor to Camilo Adas. Camilo is a master researcher of green hydrogen research, and he has published many technical articles in journals, and he's the superintendent of B8 Energy Transition, where he's responsible for hydrogen and biofuels for the energy transition at sea. He is the leader of the Rede LE that supports the Minister of Development and Science of Brazil. So a lot of experience here. Camilo, please, you have the floor. Thank you, Marcelo. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank for the organizers. This is a very important event. And 2 quick disclaimers. I'm not from the maritime industry. I'm from the roadway transportation. I worked for Mercedes-Benz for product development for over 30 years. And I know a lot about energy transition with focus on roadways modals, but they use diesel engines, and maritime also does that, but I'm still learning. And the second disclaimer is that I have changed my presentation overnight because of yesterday's presentations. I added some information that I think that it will aggregate information here. We had 2 or 3 years on road highways discussing electrification, and if we're looking at most producers of cars here in Brazil are focusing on electric cars and hybrids, and so it's an urgent debate. Our company is not very well known, so I will present you quickly. We're a Brazilian company with 100% of Brazilian capital. We haven't closed our 2023 balance EBITDA, and we are based in Passo Fundo. It is the largest manufacturer of biodiesel in the world, and we are placed in Argentina, Dubai, Switzerland. It has as products biodiesel, soybean hulls, and many others that you can see here. And we are selling to many international markets. Now, these products are fundamental to complement the debate that we have started yesterday. And I have a few elements here to show you their to show you some of the situations that we see. From the social point of view, our company has a good participation in its region and Brazil. In the factory of Passo Fundo and Marialva, the economic and social contribution is fundamental, and we have expanding to improve that social contribution. And about our certifications, that is a challenge, but we're not scared by it. On the contrary, we have all of these certifications, the ISCC, the RFS from American government, AIPA. We have Renova Bio, CARB. So what Marcelo has talked about, the challenges and dilemmas that we face as Brazilians to prove ourselves out there, to show that we can organize. And it depends on this. If we show through our certifications what we're doing, I think we're going to be able to progress a lot faster. And a social aspect here, if we see the ESG, is that this work has to be done in partnership with our work partners, with our communities that we're acting on. Because of soy, that's a very important product to us, and it needs to be traceable. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, and I will bring to you a few other elements on traceability. But if we do not raise awareness to our population, and in the case of agribusiness, in case of a producer family, we have to, what can we do to tell them about decarbonization? They have to be aware of that. For example, for kitchen oil that is reused, yesterday we discussed that and how to trace back that oil. We've had examples of how that is done. You guys, we cannot just say that we need second generation biofuels if our process is not certified. So you have to go to the restaurant of a fast food and trace that oil back for the whole chain. So there are utopic actions that that are thought for the short term. They will happen, but not like this. When we look at this complete chain, that subproduct that I have mentioned will simply confirm what we had seen yesterday. So just a quick math. We have here a graph with the soy production of about 150 million tons. And I don't see the numbers very well, but I think 98% is exported to other countries, and we have 54 tons here in Brazil because there's a lot of loss during the process. Out of those 54 that are here in Brazil, 41 will become soy whole, and that is part of the production of the biodiesel process and is exported to animal protein. So we are, through animal protein, we are profiting more. And out of these 5%, it is used for other ends. So you have biodiesel, for example, and what has begun with a total production of soybean, 5% is turned into biodiesel. All of the rest is used for the food chain. So this is something we have to do with Europeans, is stop saying that we're not producing food. Let's get into the maritime sector. So these numbers we're talking about of 105,000 fleets in the world. Half of them are around the G20 countries. Let's look at this total. We see here in Europe, China, and Indonesia, with the largest amount, with the largest fleets, Brazil is only 2%. And if we're looking on the right table, the average lifespan of these vessels are 24 years. Again, don't just pay attention to the exact numbers. Um, and this is just a quick presentation, but it's important to see that this is a very large fleet, 53,000 ships, and these ships and vessels, they have an average lifespan of 22 to 24 years. And how can we decarbonize this? How can we do this tomorrow, for example? There's no time to wait. And we have the roadway modals. Most of these ships are internal combustion. Most of them are diesel. And if we look at this reality and we see everything that is going on, I think the example that we saw from Wärtsilä yesterday, they have many technologies. Mercadante did a very good presentation on the different routes for decarbonizing maritime sector. All of that is fundamental. When Marcelo was introducing me here, is one of the things that I do is the development of hydrogen here in Brazil, not only as a commodity to export it, but the Brazilian industry of hydrogen that we will be able to see in the next 5 to 10 years, and we have to invest on research. When we're looking, so yesterday, Wärtsilä presented their difficulties with hydrogen, that it needs 7 times a volume in a vessel, but we see that heavy load vehicles like trains and trucks and ships have a strong tendency for hydrogen, and engineering has some solutions to solve this problem. And I disagree a little bit of what Wärtsilä said about liquid hydrogen. Because of this project that I participated in, a project for over 20 years, this truck was able to drive for 1,000 kilometers with this fuel, and they had the same proportion of efficiency as the diesel one. So here it is minus 253, and with 700 bars we can do that the same way. So I wanted to discuss this better. Will the ship really need 7 times more volume of hydrogen? I'm not saying that this was there's an error there. I'm just saying that there are still many possibilities to work with, but this development takes time. So if you know the TRL concept, it's really no use of looking into TRL 1, 2, or 3 technologies. We need a 9 level for the industrialization, or we will not have a decarbonization tomorrow. We cannot only look at the environmental issue if we don't look at the economic and social as well.
In order to bring this together, I have a last example because I ran out of time here with the road. There are 2 million trucks in this circulating truck fleet. So it's a very similar dilemma to the maritime. So while we wait for the new technology to come, we are emitting CO2 every minute as we speak, and more than 15 years ago and even more. We are already emitting, and nobody's going to electrify so quickly. Nobody's going to get hydrogen so quickly. And we depend on HVO. We can have a drop-in solution with HVO. Yes, we can. The price of HVO, depending on the time, is twice the price of biodiesel. And it competes with SAF, that is the same productive process. And aviation is already ahead of the maritime sector. So while we wait for the HVO, SAF is consuming raw material and elevating the price of HVO. HVO is not going to get any soon. So the result is, if we don't have a quick solution, and this solution is still biodiesel, things are not going to work out. I retired from Mercedes at 6 years old. I came back to the market because I believe what I say. I have two daughters, and we need to live a better world. And we have here a solution that is simple and practical of biodiesel that was developed, and it can be used 100% in a cycle diesel engine. Of course, it has to be evaluated by everyone. Everyone has to get their own ship and assess that. But with this type of products that is a methyl ester double distilled, we can have an immediate 10-15% over the price of biodiesel to fight energy transition in the next 10 or 15 years while the new technologies do not come. I'm sorry if I ran out of my time here. Thank you, Camilo. If I understood correctly, just to concatenating my idea, Peter talked about the collaboration in the value chain for the consumers and producers, etc., and the challenges of regulation that are going to happen in these markets is not going to happen without regulation, and the risk seen by the financial sector. So then Camilo is putting their feet on the ground to see how things happen in practice. The certification is the first answer. How do we improve communication through certification? Traceability, it also appeared in your presentation. The importance of traceability and to demystifying the regulation. If it is a regulation on energy that's going to compete with foods, it become the risk is even higher. So it's totally aligned with Peter's message. And lastly, 2 points that I liked, I think it's worth mentioning, is to be agnostic to technology. We are not sure about the technology that is going to come, but the necessity to bring this to the present, the time that this evolution is going to take place. If I agreed correctly, if I understood correctly, I'm curious about what Joaquin is going to say. For those who don't know Joaquin Seabra, he is an associate professor of the mechanical engineering professor, and he has a graduation in food engineering by Unicamp, a PhD in energy systems by Unicamp, and postdoc by Andrel, United States. And his main areas of research is bioenergy and biorefineries, energy planning, evaluation of life cycle, sustainability, energy systems, greenhouse gas balance, and 20 years of experience in the bioeconomy field, developing many projects for private institutions, government institutions in the evaluation of environmental and technical performance. He was a member of the working group that developed Renova Calc. He's a member of the working group of Renova Bio, of ANP, and also the field test group of IMO and ICAO, and the Brazilian delegation of the intersectional working group on reduction of GHG from ships of IMO as well. Currently, he's a scholar on the productivity in research and 1C of CNPq, and he was in my PhD board. You approved my PhD thesis. So please, the floor is yours. So, did I give you a good grade? So I gave you the right to bear arms. So. Okay, good morning or good afternoon. I'm talking about transition here. I have a few slides, but I don't know if this is working. I don't know if I can make this work. They're going to put up? Oh, okay. That's it. Okay, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you very much, the organizers, for the invitation. This is a great opportunity to talk to you. Marcelo, thank you for the long introduction that I gave you. I'm sorry. I'm not that relevant. Now, talking about time, a characteristic that I have is to be laconic, and nobody's going to complain that because I'm standing between you and lunch. So I'll be very brief here. Because as we are here in the middle of the second day, And in the first day, we had many different presentations approaching the subject of biofuels for maritime transportation. I will use many of the things that were already said in the first day and what was said today, and to choose some specific points and call attention to some elements that I would like to highlight. It's a little bit different from what was discussed with brilliant presentations these days. It was mentioned more than once the flexibility that the maritime sector has, especially when we compare to the aviation sector. Although it's also a hard to abate sector, we have more options. Then this was mentioned by many speakers before me, and it was mentioned now in this panel again. So this picture is of a paper that we made many comparisons with the possibility of biofuels, including biofuel cells and internal combustion engines. We have a diversity of options. We also have a diversity of options not only in the technology of use, but in the choice of biofuels. I'm not going through the details of these charts. If you are interested, we can share the publications. We have all the details about these calculations. Uh, Roughly, it was mentioned more than once that using biofuels in a comparison well to weight, that we can have a rough reduction of 80-60% of a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared with the fossil fuels. Okay, from the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions perspective, we trust in the use of biofuels. With one detail, we have this perspective of being able to use the biofuels as a mitigator of emissions, but one thing we cannot set aside, that regulation and policy, the use of land and the change of land of use of land. We cannot, under any circumstances, to be reckless about deforestation. We already have a well-established policy, set of policies that is well established for the use of land in Brazil in the process of deforestation, that we have to be careful to keep this working well, because this is exactly what Marcelo and my colleagues who work in the international debates are going to take to the regulation, to give them confidence that yes, we can use biofuels because there won't be any deforestation. And the second element that I want to call even more attention, Marcelo already mentioned here. Besides not having deforestation, that means that we won't have the greenhouse gas emissions associated with deforestation and the change of use of land. When I use more degraded areas to culture raw materials for the production of biofuels, only in this change we have a tremendous potential to act as a sequestrator of carbon. This can be induced by the maritime transportation that is going to consume this biodiesel. So this is a way to promote initially this carbon sequestration in the soil. And this is the first major tool that we have to produce a biofuel with a carbon footprint that is negative. This is an strategic aspect that can be implemented in the short, very short term, making this proper transition with good regulation using the technologies that we have in large scale. We already know how to use it. So when we make all these calculations of the abatement costs, many of the panelists already showed this concern that the cost is high to change to different types of biofuels, different technologies. Some of them are going to cost more and others are going to cost less, but the perspective is that the costs are going to increase. And in fact, these abatement costs of carbon in the maritime transportation tends to have its cost really relevant. Let's say a few hundreds of dollars by CO2 tons that was shown here. In this aspect, I want to call your attention to a second big opportunity that we have today, already available. Somebody said here, it was said by more than one panelist, advantages of different routes of production of biofuels. All of them bring advantages and disadvantages. I'm going to repeat specifically one specific issue associated with the biofuels that use the fermentation. So, the case of ethanol, for example. There we have a second possibility, very interesting possibility of also producing a carbon sequestration from the CO2 that leaves fermentation in a high concentration and an interesting level of purity with an easiness of capture. And there we have the capacity that in the short run we can make the injection and carbon sequestration. I'm not talking about carbon sequestration in the vessels, and I'm talking about the carbon sequestration in the land where the abatement cost is about $20 per ton, roughly. This abatement cost is much more competitive compared to other alternatives that we have in the market. Many of them can be implemented in the maritime sector. So here we are talking about technological options that are absolutely dominated biofuels that can be implemented in large scale in the short term in a reasonable cost. That now what we have to do, we to take care of the regulation and the project with the future perspectives tends to be this care with CCUS, and this can be used and leveraged and demanded by the maritime transportation to make viable this ecosystemic system that Brazil can serve the world to capture carbon. So when we have these available fuels with negative carbon footprint, that means that we can deliver an absurd mitigation with lower volumes necessity, theoretically reducing the cost and impact on the maritime transportation. So we already have good conditions that we have to harness and bring allied, because we have another concern now. This diversity of options that were presented, great, this brings flexibility. At the same time, it was already mentioned here that the availability of capital, although it is increasing, is relatively small. So we have to be careful not to shoot whatever the nose points to find the finance capacity. So we have to make right choices and have a good influence in this regulation market, in the international market, so we don't fall in some traps here that Marcelo mentions. In the elements, for example, cascading or things of the sort will appear more frequently, and we have to put in the window our situation. For example, I'm going to make an advertisement here. Marcelo knows because he's already my partner. This is a platform that was developed to disclose internationally issues related to sustainability of production of biomass and biofuels for maritime transportation because they were started first. The same logics can be used for maritime transportation. We have to publicize, to make available internationally what are the precautions, the criteria, and the sustainability contours that we have in our national context. So all the researchers, regulators, policymakers, international and national, can access easily. Brazil is not in Mars, is not in the bottom of the ocean. We are here. We have the condition to produce an absurd quantity of biofuels for different applications, respecting many sustainability criteria. We have to make this clear and to make this available to subsidize all these people with the confidence. I promise to be quick. This is the summary. So I give back the floor to the chair, and I want to thank the opportunity. If you have time for questions, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joaquin. Going back to the challenges brought by Peter in the beginning. So you brought important elements that bioenergy, Camilo said this, put in the present, but you talked about bioenergy of the future when we need energy systems that are close to zero. It can be zero, it can be negative, and it can be now. I was already expecting an excellent presentation coming from you, not only because you were from my PhD board. Okay, it's been some years, but we still have a trauma. Okay, Ronaldo Carmona now. He's a professor of FINAP. He is a doctor in geography by the University of São Paulo, a professor in geopolitics of the War School, and assistant of innovation of FINAP and the Brazilian Agency of Innovation, and he coordinates the group of innovations of the International Relations Group. He was head of planning of the Ministry of Defense. So the floor is yours. So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Admiral Wilkes for the invitation to participate in this seminar that I have followed since yesterday. And it is an extremely wonderful initiative, and I want to congratulate the introduction of this debate in high level here in Brazil so we can take further steps in this issue. As it was said, I represent FINAP here. FINAP is the Brazilian Agency of Innovation. That is the public company of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation responsible for being the executive secretary of the FENDCT, that are the resources of the Brazilian state focused on science, technology, and innovation. So my role here is a little bit different from my fellow panelists because I was invited to talk about the fostering, the encouragement from the Brazilian state of innovation to the establishment of these green fuels. But it wouldn't be possible to talk about this Brazilian challenge without contextualizing why the current reality requires more action from the Brazilian state with this challenge. After all, I'm going to talk about the geopolitics of the energy transition. We live in a world that this is not new to all of you, but the energy is still being a national power factor. The possession of surplus of energy or the energy dependency becomes more critical in the global geopolitical scenario. Recent factors as COVID-19 and more specifically the war in Ukraine explicit the vulnerabilities resulting from this dependence of energy from the abroad. And that made, in the case of Europe, especially about the Russian gas, they made important measures to overcome this vulnerability. And considering the scarcity of natural resources in the old continent, the option to continue with the renewable energies was a decision that is ongoing. And the statement of the climate issue as a central element of the global agenda made the group of powers to engage strongly in this agenda of energy transition. So to contextualize the problem, the first thing to be said is that today the energy transition is a global imperative, and no other country can not have a strong engagement on that. Especially because these three main players, European Union, United States, and China, they try through an economic and technological race and intelligence race, they try to dictate the taxonomies and the rules that are going to govern this energy transition system. And on the other hand, or at the same time, they want to lead the technological revolution that will make viable this energy transition.
After all, just like the presentation from my previous colleagues shows that we are facing many complex challenges and also a cost situation that is still very elevated for the energy transition. And the fact is that Brazil, and that has been shown in this seminar, especially yesterday, it has extraordinary opportunities, and from the energy transition being a support to this big reindustrialization in Brazil, as also to become a great exporter of clean energy. And Brazil, in this new highly complex sector, we have seen examples of best international practices. That is the idea of associating innovation policies to the industrial policies. And here in Brazil, we have an industrial policy program that's called Nova Indústria Brasil that are connected to innovation policies that's called Mais Inovação Brasil that associates both programs with a group of instruments by FINEP, and we are supporting either with reimbursable funding or economic subvention tools or equity tools, and also with the restructuring of the national innovation system. Those are actions that will collaborate to the industrial sector. Now, I would like to specifically talk about the support of FINEP and to the energy transition at sea, especially when we're talking about fostering of green fuels. And in this program that is called Mais Inovação, we've had 11 public callings that I cannot read all of the details here, but from the 11 open public calls that we have, about 5 of them are related to the decarbonization and fostering of green fuels. A first one that is connected to urban mobility, where we see the hybrid and electric vehicles with batteries that use strategic minerals and strategies to reduce the CO2 emission in public transportation are the ones that are being fostered by this program. Another one that we saw, it is the SAF that is in the worldwide aviation market. So topics like the tests of aircrafts using SAF, that's one of the projects from FINEP. And a third calling that is referred to the household and sanitation waste, and where we see lines like solution for biomethane and as an important factor for the presentation of projects. Renewable energies is a fourth calling, where we have topics such as hydrogen and energy storage are also opportunities for innovation projects. And finally, in the bioeconomy area, the fifth of the 11 callings, where there is a line specifically used for sustainable fuels for aviation and for the maritime sector. So I invite all of the companies here to get to know these opportunities better, because we're talking about non-reimbursable funding. So these are economic subvention resources for the development of innovation development. That's exactly an attempt to foster good projects. These are projects that I could bring to you a huge list of innovation projects that are being supported by the Brazilian government. But just to sum up here, products in the energy transition area that are talking about production of hydrogen from biogas and the better use of hydric resources, the development of 100% electric buses that are being acquired by the city of Porto Alegre, the technological development of urban mobility, electric urban mobility from Tramontina, and the naval industry. I would specifically show these 2 projects that are very interesting One of them is about an electric propulsor to navigation, and also a system that was developed within the Marine of Brazil about the threat of oil leak at sea. Well, so I invite you all to get to know our funding options, because Brazil is finally decided to face this challenge. We are searching through these initiatives. We're trying to get up to the race that is taking place worldwide, and we will play an important role. So this is a contribution that the Brazilian government is offering. Thank you all. And these are my contact information. Thank you. Ronaldo, thank you very much. And obviously you have generated a lot of interest here because there are so many interesting facts that sometimes we don't know of, and we have to try to use all of these opportunities and use the rules of different lines that you have. I don't know if we have time for a final round of questions and answers. Well, so we'll go to the closing ceremony. Thank you all very much for our panelists. Let's go to the picture, to the official photo, and a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for the great contribution. It is 12:50, and because we have advanced on our time, we will restart at 2:15 with Bruno Arruda from the Ministry of Foreign Relations. He'll discuss decarbonization strategies and measures for the greenhouse effect gas emissions. Have a great lunch. We'll be back at 2:15.